This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Many thanks for that start, shall we, with a little bit of gratitude for making that decision on a Monday morning. We're going to start very much in the deep end today with a conversation about a British engagement, a British bombing camp or a British-backed bombing campaign in the Middle East. I don't know that there is any issue really before us where this sort of modern demand for strong opinions is potentially more dangerous than it is on this one. I think many of us should be a little more haunted, perhaps, by some of the unquestioning support that was offered up for Tony Blair's mission in Iraq. Tony Blair in the news today, adjacent to the news today, because of this curious poll conducted by the Daily Telegraph confirming or enforcing the very widespread perception that the Tory party is heading for a sort of form of electoral oblivion comparable to the one it suffered when Tony Blair was elected Prime Minister. I say it's a curious poll because, I shall share my thoughts on that with you later. But the idea that I think it's quite hard to resist sometimes a position that is not defined by the facts. I think that there are two people possessed of strong opinions when it comes to military engagement in general and in the Middle East in particular. There are people who believe that our side must always be right, and that is a healthy position to have in many ways. And there are people who believe that our side must always be wrong, and that is a healthy position to have in many ways. Many of the problems in the world, not just in that part of the world, but problems that are in some ways imported from the Middle East, are a consequence of Western imperialism. If you look at the borders of some of the countries in that part of the world, you will be left wondering how on earth they can be so straight. Normally borders are defined by rivers or territories that include mountain ranges, the gaps, the barriers, the borders between two conflicting peoples. And at some point in history, almost everybody's had a scrap over who gets to keep all the riches. They're normally quite geographically defined, aren't they? Even counties sometimes. You look at the map of the United Kingdom, head over there, and it looks like they've been drawn with rulers, these borders. Do you know why that is? Of course you do. It's because they have been drawn with rulers, sort of French and British diplomats getting out a set square and literally drawing lines. That'll be Iraq, that'll be Iran. It's not obviously completely true, but I come then to Israel and the 1948 foundation of the modern state of Israel, very much a Western imposition upon Middle Eastern people. And you sort of find yourself wondering whether those who've always argued that every time NATO get involved or every time an American-led mission gets involved, it ends up creating more problems in the long term than it could ever hope to solve in the short term. And that is where you end up sometimes with people who claim to have the best interests of Britain at heart being on the side of the Syrian leader, Assad, or even close to Vladimir Putin's international political ambitions. So you don't need to have a strong opinion, and you should probably have at least some wariness regarding what you think now, according to what you think last time. So Yemen is essentially in a state of civil war, where the government, as it were, is supported by Saudi Arabia and the rebels are supported by Iran. So it is once again a proxy Shia-Sunni battleground where the West are involved, even as they pretend not to be, because our support militarily and diplomatically for Saudi Arabia, despite the fact that they do things like chop up journalists with bone saws, is well established and incredibly lucrative. The arms trade to Saudi Arabia and other countries with profoundly dubious human rights records remains huge. And it's particularly huge in the sense that the people that make all the money out of it are very adjacent to conservative governments, conservative politicians. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Margaret Thatcher's own son make an absolute fortune from the Al-Yamamah arms deal about 158 years ago. I think I was still doing my A-levels at the time, but just to enforce the idea that the actual total numbers may not be that huge, but the reason why the Tory party love these kind of deals is because they often end up seeing a piece of the action further down the line. So you don't need to have a strong opinion, but you do find yourself thinking, and listen, I should be a little bit more personal, a little bit more honest about this. I remember saying with my full chest, and I was relatively new to the business of being paid for my opinions at the time. I didn't have this job, and it was a long way away from where I am now politically and in every sense. But I remember thinking that the case against Saddam Hussein was so obvious because he was a murderous despot. And if you had the opportunity to take out one murderous despot, even if you couldn't if you had 10 murderous despots lined up against the wall, and you got the opportunity to take out one of them, then saying that, well, why aren't you taking out the other 9 is not really an argument. But it kind of is, isn't it? If one of the other 9 is an ally, if one of the other 9, for example, is the King of Saudi Arabia. So all of this is designed to introduce the admission that when I heard on Friday that Rishi Sunak had elected to support a bombing campaign in Yemen without consulting the House of Commons, and there were apparently conversations with the Speaker and with the Leader of the Opposition, I didn't know what to think. The simple fact is that Houthis are launching missiles at, for example, and including American vessels. That they are doing so is almost certainly a consequence of the unfolding massacre in Gaza. I don't think anyone can dispute the use of the phrase ethnic cleansing now, but of course the use of the even more provocative word genocide is something that we shall leave to the court case that South Africa are currently pursuing, the international court case that South Africa are currently pursuing. I don't think, for all of this sort of reservation, I don't think that letting Houthis go on attacking ships with no reprisals was the right option to take. I guess what I'm leading up to is this sense that I think this was probably the right thing to do. But I'm so wary of having thought in the past that something was the right thing to do when it turned out perhaps not to be the right thing to do. Offering up full-throated support to Israel in the immediate aftermath of that disgusting terrorist massacre on October the 7th, I think that's backfired pretty horribly on Western government, well, on the UK and the US. The rest of the world is pursuing a very different flavour of conversation on that field. But the support, the full-throated support for George W. Bush to finish what his father had started in the Gulf, that probably led to ISIS, all sorts of issues that the world then ends up struggling with. I don't think at the moment, and I'm quite wary of saying this out loud, I don't think at the moment any of that makes the current decision or the current engagement, the current involvement of the West the wrong thing to have done. What's the alternative? You allow these people, backed by Iran, to continue to jeopardize our lives, or at least our livelihoods. You allow them to attack ships with no reprisals and therefore drive up the price of transport, the price of oil, the price of goods, the price of everything. That resumption in shipping through the Red Sea, absolutely intrinsic to world trade. But I have so many ghosts of opinions past queuing up behind me that's why I want to talk about it from this angle today. 0345 6060 973. In many ways, the people least helpful on mornings like this are the people that are adamant about everything within 3 seconds of the facts emerging. I'm absolutely, and that's how you end up supporting Assad accidentally, if you like, or claiming that the white helmets in Syria were parts of a conspiracy. This desperation, it's a human desperation. It must be evolutionary. This desperation never to be wrong, to back yourself even when you know your back's to the wall, even when you know you're digging a deep, deep hole. You stay there. You stay there arguing and desperately claiming this or claiming that. And yet, the world is a complicated place. and never more so, perhaps, than when we look at issues like this. So I'll say it. I don't think that this was necessarily the wrong thing to do, but I'm haunted by ghosts of opinions past, and I'm acutely conscious of this combination of American and British intervention being an increasingly worrying phenomenon. You know, the threat of an escalation in the Middle East seems to me to be as big as it was on Thursday. I don't know that it has increased even more, but that caller Nick had, and the one that he played out at the end of the show there, just before I start babbling, I thought that was really good. This is a civil war, as I've said. It's a civil war between Iranian-backed. You can't call them terrorists if you prefer. It's always an interesting word, isn't it? Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, according to very senior British politicians, and the British-backed Saudis, or rather the Saudi-backed government in Yemen. Saudi leadership fits most definitions of murderous despot, but they're our friends, so we don't use words like that. That's what I mean by it being complicated. A Sunni-Shia battle that is a proxy for Saudi Arabia versus Iran, which is essentially a distillation of centuries of conflict in the Middle East, which we have sided with and against entirely according to self-interest. When Iraq was fighting Iran, we were on the side of Iraq. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, we invaded Iraq. And so I don't know, but I think this was probably the right thing to do. How about you? 0345 6060 973. And we will have a side order of Parliament. So Sunak didn't recall Parliament. Deeply upsets largely irrelevant backbenchers who like to make speeches about how clearer and unconfused they are on these sort of issues. But other than that, if the leader of the opposition is on side, I don't know that the bypassing of Parliament was a particular problem. But again, 0345 6060 973 is the number you need if you feel that it was. And that is, if you like, the second, it's not as important as the engagement itself, as the mission itself. But if it's something that matters to you in that you feel that I am trivialising or under-reporting, then that's what the phone lines are for. 0345 6060 973. I'll have a look at some of the messages just by way of revealing to you just the kind of silliness that I have to deal with on a day like this one. Here's Mark. Be transparent, please. Yemen Saudi is about two types of Muslims fighting each other, Sunni and Shia. Give the correct facts. I don't know how many times you've heard me say that in the last 15 minutes, but Mark has obviously got gristle in his ears, and someone else is very cross with me for not saying that Israel and Saudi Arabia are US-backed. I didn't think, Leon, that anybody needed that pointing out. I said Saudi Arabia was US-backed and British-backed, but when I talk about how the UK and the US seem to be increasingly alone on the issue of the massacre in Gaza, if you need me to explain what that means in words of one syllable, then I'll try to, but you can't really take me to task for not treating my audience as if they're all as thick as you, can you? And that's got things off on a nice friendly footing at 10:17.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
If this is your own joke, then I'm afraid you're going straight to the top of the class this morning. But if you've pinched it off someone else, then shame on you. It's the first time I've seen it in a tweet from JPC. It says, James, of course Rishi Sunak didn't recall Parliament. It's well known that he doesn't recall anything. And there is a rather splendid clip doing the rounds at the moment of, I think, all three of them. Is it Johnson, Cameron and Sunak in giving evidence in various contexts, saying they can't remember, they don't know. Even Laura Koonsberg gave David Cameron a light toasting at the weekend over the still undisclosed amounts of money he made from that company that I think is still facing investigation in at least two other countries, but which David Cameron was trying to use his influence to secure lucrative deals with the government for during the COVID lockdowns. So what better way than to reward his apparent complicity in at least a form of cronyism than by making him Foreign Secretary. The Foreign Secretary, of course, who is in the chair for the decision to support bombing campaigns in the Yemen, aimed at Houthi fighters, Houthi terrorists, who have been launching missiles at ships. And if you struggle to understand why it's important to bring Gaza into this conversation, try this on for size. This is from Dave. Tens of thousands of innocents killed by Israel, by the Israeli army, and we do nothing. Trade interrupted in a shipping lane, and we send in the planes. That's a position I find very worrying. I do too, but it doesn't mean necessarily that sending the planes in is wrong. And another one, which I will read out, and it doesn't go into Idiot's Corner because it's a valid point, and it may well be one that ends up making a mockery of my current position. It's not your children, James, so you crack on. That's a very good point as well. 10:22 is the time. Matt is in St Albans. Matt, what would you like to say?
Hiya, first time caller.
Oh, God, you pick them, don't you?
Yeah, I know. I've been sitting listening to the radio for the last 4 years thinking, when am I going to give them a call?
Go on.
I've been sitting all weekend and just thinking about this. And I just got more and more angry and just gone through all the sort of thoughts. And I just feel like there's a few points. Obviously, I mean, in my opinion, it's that, the Tory party are very corrupt. And, I don't think it takes, too many points to show that. But I just feel like, you'd hope that they would have, recalled Parliament.
Do you? That's important to you, is it?
Yeah, I think, considering that we've got currently a Prime Minister that no one actually elected, and then they,
and a foreign secretary that nobody voted for.
Yeah, and also caused a huge amount of unrest in this country, and then just, went off on his way and just made a load of money. But anyway, that aside, yeah, it sits really bad with me as well, because I feel like we sit here with this sort of moral high ground, and I'm not saying, and I don't mean this to, agree with Russia, but, how are we any different to Putin if we're just going to go and drop bombs without asking anyone? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do, up to a point. I mean, Putin was the aggressor. Putin is an invader, and I know you know this, but I mean, I need to point out the rather big differences. The question about the moral high ground stands, but, fighting back against a foreign invasion, as they have done in Ukraine, is
not to say that what I mean. Though,
I do know what you mean. It's the lack of accountability and it's the lack of democratic transparency. But if the leader of the opposition is supportive of the action, then what does recalling Parliament on Friday, giving the Houthis warning of what was coming? That's one of the arguments that's been deployed for not doing it. It's a live and swift situation. What would it really have changed, given that we know there would have been support for it in the unlikely event that it had ever gone to a vote at all?
Well, I think it's still part of the process, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think process is important, and I think that we should have at least, even if it had gone through. I was a teenager actually younger than that, even when we started, the Iraq War.
Yes.
And I didn't have any say in that matter then.
No.
But I do now, and I just feel like before we decide to sort of get involved with these conflicts, I just think that we should have been consulted, on the whole thing. We should, we had a referendum about Brexit.
Yes.
Why are we not having a referendum to decide whether or not we want to go to war? Because that's what this is. We're basically deciding, do we want to go to war or not? And we're not getting a decision.
So, I mean, these are attacks on Iran-backed Houthi rebel positions, and the Houthi rebels are carrying out attacks on ships in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could describe it as an escalation, or as the baby steps, the foothills.
You can see where it's going, though, right?
Well, what happens next?
You watch.
Iran won't get involved. They're quite happy for the Houthis to carry on drawing all the fire themselves.
I don't know.
No.
I don't know. I feel like I have a more pessimistic view of the world the more it goes on. And I don't know. That's kind of my point, really.
No, it's a very good point, and actually almost the perfect beginning to the conversation. And it is independent, Matt, isn't it, of the question of whether or not it is the right thing to do.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's such a complex matter. I don't feel like I necessarily have, or anyone necessarily has the exact right answer. And And we may have it come to a conclusion that in the long term might be the wrong one. But I feel like, isn't the point of our democracy that we decide together to get involved in something, not, and I don't know.
I like the fact. I love the fact that you live. I can hear in your voice that you know the difficulties of it. You'll never get a job on the Daily Mail, mate, or as a Rupert Murdoch columnist, because you're thinking about things and recognising complexities. What you're supposed to do is just run a flag up a flagpole and start singing. And that is, part of the reason why it can sometimes be portrayed as unpatriotic when you are not supportive of a British military engagement or British support for a military engagement. On the other hand, and you know me, I'm not an on the other hand merchant, but occasionally needs must. The situation demands. And on the other hand, if someone takes a pop at your ship, then you take a pop back at them. That seems a fairly straightforward rule. The difference being, of course, you have the capability to take a pop back, and we can't escape the observation from Dave at the top of the show that well over 20,000 innocents now dead in Gaza, half of them children, and we are still on paper supportive of that campaign. Some Houthi rebels interfere with trade in the Red Sea, and we start dropping bombs on them. I'm not suggesting that is definitely a troubling double standard, but you'd have to work quite hard to persuade me that it's not worthy of mention. 28 after 10 is the time. Lucy's in Kilmarnock. Lucy, what would you like to say?
Good morning. Happy Mondays.
Yes, great man.
What it is, actually, I was just listening to what you had to say. I'm a regular listener, but I've never phoned in before, so bear with me if I hit a stutter. It's just nerves.
Of course I will. Of course, take your time.
I'm a wee bit concerned about the amount of sort of power that the sort of crown Saudi prince has in this situation. I mean, ever since the Russian oil was kind of depleted from the West, we really relied on this man who 5 years ago was basically pariahed for apparently maybe having just the journalist Jamal Khashoggi basically.
Khashoggi. I don't think you need an apparently or a maybe there. I think the involvement of the crown.
We're all good. No suing, thank God.
No.
So he was basically internationally pariahed, and now he's swaggering about the White House. He's swaggering about Downing Street. He knows that he has got power, and it's hard to look at what's happening in Yemen and think, well, before October the 7th, Yemen was known to be the worst international humanitarian crisis.
And the poorest country in the world, I think, as well.
Yeah, the poorest country in the world, with absolutely no infrastructure to help with mental health services. People were dying of starvation, diarrhea. They're not in a situation to defend themselves against powers like the United States and the United Kingdom. And although I'm not saying, yes, just let the Houthi terrorists away with it, what I will say, though, is when we hear things like, we just need to get rid of this terrorist group, that's what we heard about Hamas, and with 30,000 dead Palestinians.
That's what we heard about the Taliban and ISIS.
Yeah, I mean, a million dead Iraqis and Afghanistanians. When does it end? At what point do we say, hold on a second, you can't even make sure that children...
I'm really sorry for coming back at you with such a blunt instrument. But if someone shoots at our ships, they can expect to be shot back at. I mean, isn't that almost separate from the broader context?
Well, I understand where you're coming from, yes, and of course they obviously knew there was going to be a response and a reaction, but what I would argue at the moment is we are not in a position to be throwing our weight about in the Middle East.
You're the second caller to say that, because you're referring to the concept of a moral high ground, aren't you, and the absurdity of claiming that we have any hold upon it.
I think when you look back at our involvement, even just from the end of World War I, we have caused so much frustration between communities in the Middle East that to even sit there and continuously back Israel and back the devastation of life, knowing for a fact that the minute that something affects us, we are going to go and drop bombs. And I am curious to find out, are people concerned that maybe there are new cars held up in that ship, or have we got Tories concerned that their profits are being sunk to the bottom of the Red Sea?
Again, powerful, but not necessarily a complete dismissal of the argument that they are firing missiles at those ships, and therefore you can expect to have things fired back, regardless of what's on the ships. Lucy, I don't think that's weaselly. I don't think that's weaselly of me. I think that's valid.
No, of course, and that's what I said as well. There is no way I can come at you and say, do you know what, I've got all the answers here, because I'll be honest, I'm a first-year politics student. I don't really know, but I'm very much engaged in what is happening.
If it had been put before Parliament, Lucy, Lee Anderson would have had a vote on it, so I'm not taking your self-deprecation as somehow disqualifying you from having an opinion on an issue like this. Jonathan Gullis would have had a vote on this issue, so I'm fairly confident that so far, at least 2 out of the 3 voices that we've heard on this programme are supremely qualified to offer their opinions. It's just the fella presenting it I'm not so sure about. 10:31 is the time. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:35, and just as an indication of how dangerous it is, perhaps, to go a little bit knee-jerk or a little bit two-dimensional, a little bit binary on any issue that involves military engagement, but involvement in the Middle East in particular. And you know, I think it was Laura making a point about trade and saying cars held up on, and these are good points. And Dave's point, I think, is the best so far today. You can drop bombs on thousands of innocent people in Gaza and enjoy support from the British government, but you fire some missiles at some ships in the Red Sea and we'll bomb you. Strange, perhaps. Comparison to draw, but not one that I'm comfortable with. But later in the programme, we're probably going to be talking about medicine shortages, some increasingly difficult drug shortages. Some of the problems are peculiar to Britain, some of them are international, and among the international elements is the fact that drugs and medicine ingredients already affected by the war in Ukraine and problems in global supply chains, exacerbated here, of course, by Brexit. But remember, everybody knew exactly what they were voting for, especially older voters who are now worrying about their own supply of important medicines. The instability in the light of violence in the Red Sea, a key shipping corridor for these kind of ingredients, now gets worse. So it's not just about PlayStations or cars. It's to think of it as an artery that is crucial to our health, not just our wealth, but our health. In fact, more importantly, our health than our wealth. 10:37 is the time. Quite a few people pointing out the Tories' contempt for Parliament in its current iteration. So, how you kind of square that with this position that they should be consulting Parliament? They prorogued it, sent Jacob Rees-Mogg to Balmoral to mislead the Queen. Rishi Sunak's never squeaked about how inappropriate that was, or about the unlawful prorogation of Parliament. They hold Parliament in complete contempt because it can and has proved an obstacle to their ambitions. But I don't think that counts here because of Keir Starmer's support for this action. And Glenn makes a very important point as well, which is that the people on the ships in the Red Sea are civilians. I wonder how much sympathy your callers would have for the Yemeni fighters. I haven't heard sympathy for the Yemeni fighters, Glenn. I've just heard some really profound and informed questioning of the wisdom of Britain getting involved again in Middle Eastern conflagrations. But Glenn goes on, were it members of their immediate families that were the civilian seafarers serving on the cargo ships with no means of defending themselves and now finding themselves the targets of unprovoked missile attacks? So I guess that danger is, again, of thinking everything needs to be 100%. You can make quite swinging decisions based on a ratio of, 52 to 48%. Not just as a population, but as a person. You could be 51% in favour of something and 49% against it, but you still vote for it. And that's why I don't really see what option there is but to retaliate when people start firing missiles at ships upon which we rely. So, again, that's someone else crossing me for using the word our ships, but you know what I mean. Come on, there's no point being pedantic about these things. Mofis is in Westminster. Mofis, what would you like to say?
It's just a comment I'd like to make about David Cameron.
Yeah, feel free.
During the time he was a Prime Minister, and the way he led things, I had a great deal of respect for him.
Did you?
Although, yes,
okay.
I found him a man which I believed honest and had integrity.
Yes.
Although Brexit went wrong, but that's unfortunate. He did resign after that. When he came back recently as Foreign Secretary, I thought he'll have a clear vision and take things forward in a good way. However, just recently going to Yemen and attacking Houthis, the justification and the way he presented it, that kind of made me think, is he really being honest? Because he mentioned the fact that the Houthis were attacking. The real reason wasn't the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Well, go on. What was it, according to him?
Rather, for him, they are trying to raise their profiles. He seemed to clearly know what the Houthis wanted.
And you don't trust him anymore?
The reason being, when he had an interview a couple of weeks ago regarding this Israel-Palestine issue, and he was asked that is Israel breaking international law, he dodged that question, and it seemed...
so he has certainty in some contexts, but not in others.
Yeah, Israel is a friend and an ally, and if you don't know anything about what they're doing and you're supporting them, you're providing arms and stuff as well.
Yes.
You should know what's happening, and with an enemy, their intent, you seem to know more than you know about your very close friends and allies, and that's what I found very odd, and that's kind of made me lose respect for him.
What a cute
although I'm not a Tory supporter I'm more a Labour, but I had respect for him as a leader, but now I don't...
There's a glibness there, isn't there? Oh, I'm afraid that's far too complicated. We'll have to let the relevant authorities decide. Well, I don't think that we can go down, but then hop over from Israel to Yemen. Absolutely 100% certain why everybody's doing what they're doing and why they deserve to be bombed as a consequence. It's what you're describing, isn't it?
Yes, it's more as a leader, you'd expect him to have a clear vision and everything.
And yet,
knowing what. Yes.
Well, and also, the message is use military. It's not. I mean, you're attacking civilians, albeit that attacking supply chains is a historical mode of war. The message that's being sent is that if you do anything in solidarity with the people of Gaza, we'll bomb you as well.
Yeah, what the Houthis were doing, I don't agree with it.
No,
however,
of course you don't.
They were deterring. They were acting as a deterrent, so that they can put people going through that area, so that they may be able to try to.
Yes. They say that they are attacking ships off the coast of Yemen in solidarity with the Palestinians and with the aim of facilitating entry of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. So I suppose if you were to call a ceasefire and indeed to allow more humanitarian aid in, then David Cameron would be able to have his theory tested. Because I'm pretty sure that the attacks stopped during the last, it's not really a ceasefire, is it? But the truce, if you like, when some of the Israeli hostages were released. I'm pretty sure of that, but it's something that we'll have to triple check. It is 10:43. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A lot of you picking up on the, I'm afraid, the inarguable fact of 12,000 completely innocent children being killed by the Israeli army with the support of David Cameron and Rishi Sunak, while firing missiles at ships in solidarity with those people is an offence worthy of bombing by David Cameron and Rishi Sunak. I'd listen. The phone lines are always open. If you want to have a crack at unravelling that and explaining why it's completely unfair to make this point or to draw these parallels, then you're not only able to do so, you are you are enthusiastically welcomed to explain why any force or grouping that is using force to support or express solidarity with people in Palestine must be bombed, while if you're in Palestine, you also deserve to be bombed. It's a funny one, isn't it? Well, at least it is to me. Dennis is in Crawley. Dennis, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. How are you?
Very well. What's on your mind? We don't have ages. Sorry, I've come to you quite late in the segment.
No problem. I just want to say that Iran is playing a very strategic and dangerous game here. And they are calibrating every move, not only with the Houthis, but also on the northern border of Israel with Hezbollah. And they want us to become more involved. And my question is, why isn't, for example, Egypt, which controls the Suez Canal, providing support? Why isn't Saudi Arabia providing support? And the other thing is the shipping companies themselves, there are alternatives. I'm not saying it's great, but they can go around the Horn of Africa. They can go around the bottom of Africa, and yeah, it will add to the shipping costs. But I think we're being drawn in, at carefully calibrated intervals, with Putin and even China, I think, in the background, cheering these moves on, if not coordinating. And I think Iran wants us to become involved.
No, this is a point made as well as you are making it by Sam Kiley, the author and broadcaster who's been covering the Middle East for 30 years in the newspaper today. A clan-based tribal militia backed but not much loved by Iran. What's in it for Iran? You've just answered that question. I mean, I don't know about the logistics of going around the Horn of Africa. Forgive me. I'm all right. I'm quite well informed, Dennis, but I haven't got all the facts on every issue at my fingertips. But presumably that, in the context of international trade, that would be a much bigger deal than you're currently allowing.
Well, what I'm saying is that Egypt is going to lose revenue. So why aren't they supporting? Why aren't they becoming more involved? Why does the West have to do it? And we're, I think Rishi Sunak...
I mean, we've got all the weapons.
Well, no, we're giving them weapons. Saudi Arabia has lots of weapons.
Well, Saudi Arabia's been bombing Yemen for years.
Well, why should we become more involved? And
because they're taking pot shots at American ships now.
Well, then the ship companies should have people.
You can't have private militias. What do you think this is? The East India Trade Company?
They did. Have you seen the movie with Tom Hanks? They had people on there. Why should our?
But they don't have the capability of launching attacks on upon the mainland. They're there to repel potential pirates and boarders. I'm also, having started brilliantly, Dennis, I'm also wary of a conversation about Middle Eastern geopolitics that contains the phrase, have you seen the movie with Tom Hanks?
Well, I'm just using that as an example. I'm just saying that there are other
I know you are, but you know and I know that there's a difference between a bodyguard and an attack dog.
All I'm saying is that this is going to be the tripwire of escalation, which is exactly what Iran and Putin, who wants us to take the eye. We've only got certain amounts of capabilities, and with Ukraine bubbling in the background, this is what they want. This is the trap that is being laid for the West. And I'm just saying that...
And it would appear that we have walked into it, although that would depend upon what Iran does in response, and also in the newspaper, which I find increasingly to be my first port of call at times like this. Their chief foreign commentator, Michael Day, writes of the unlikelihood of, one of them does, either Michael or Sam Kiley, the unlikelihood of if Iran do have a master plan, as you have described, the unlikelihood of it actually working. But who knows? And that's the problem, isn't it? You sort of trust Rishi Sunak to have considered all the facts, to have considered all the elements and acted in the best interest of the United Kingdom. I suppose the nicest thing I could say in response to that is, well, I suppose there's a first time for everything.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:52. I'm going to pick this up quickly, Colin, and I'm not going to put you in idiot's corner because it is a widely held position and one that has been very, very successfully implanted into the heart of a conversation about 12,000 dead children. Colin says it could all stop now if the hostages were freed, which I understand the logic behind it. I understand why Suella Braverman was marching this weekend without being able to say, I'm marching in support of ethnic cleansing and the continuing massacre of civilians in Gaza. She has to say, I'm marching in support for the hostages, which is something nobody can argue with. But, of course, it moves the spotlight away from the 12,000 dead children onto the 130 remaining hostages. What you're saying, Colin, and again I stress, I'm not having a go at you about this because you didn't realise you were saying this when you texted me. What you're saying is that if your neighbours kidnap someone and you get bombed or killed or shot or murdered as a consequence of what your neighbours are doing, then that is actually your fault. Okay? Or, at the very least, it's your neighbour's fault. So your neighbour has kidnapped someone. In order to kill the kidnappers, and quite possibly the hostage as well, they drop a bomb on your whole street. They're not even sure that the hostage is next door to you, but they know they're in the rough area, so they drop a bomb on the whole street, And when you die and your family say, why is Colin dead? The response is, oh, it's all his neighbour's fault. Because they might have had a hostage next door to Colin's house. So if only they would release the hostages, then they wouldn't have to keep blowing you up, Colin. That's the argument you're making. But I stress again, the effort that's been put into trying to turn the conversation into that avenue, into that cul-de-sac, is absolutely epic. So I bear you no ill will at all for not having spotted what's going on. So you say it's all about releasing the hostages. Literally nobody who is criticising what Israel are doing in Gaza is saying, oh, Hamas must hold on to those poor hostages. Literally nobody. It's a given. It's implicit in every conversation. Release the bloody hostages. But it's Hamas. The idea that you have the right to kill 22,000 civilians because of what Hamas are doing to 130 hostages is palpably, statistically, numerically, ethically, morally, philosophically, absolutely absurd. And yet, look at where the discourse in this country has gone. Colin doesn't even realise, because he's read it in a newspaper, he's heard it on the telly, he's heard it on the radio. He doesn't even realise, it's all over his social media, what a ridiculous position that is. Your neighbour may have a hostage, so we're going to blow up your house. And that's entirely the fault of your neighbour, who you don't even know and have never spoken to. Just think about it, man. Come on. Gary's in Newcastle. Back to Yemen, Gary. What would you like to say?
We've been missing a large item from the discussion on Yemen, which is the human rights and humanitarian situation in Yemen.
The second caller went into quite a lot of detail on it, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, like
But you crack on.
The overall conversation that's been happening about the shipping lane and things has missed out the key fact that this conflict has been going on now in Yemen for about a decade. And all of a sudden, because ships are being attacked in the Red Sea, we're interested in it. But before that, we didn't have any interest in the 22 million people that are reliant on aid, the children.
I covered it on at least 4 separate occasions when I was presenting Newsnight on the BBC. So
you may have.
And I'm also hosting this conversation. So let's not have a sort of slightly boring critique of Western media. Let's talk about what's happening now and whether the decision to retaliate to the drone attacks upon the ships was the right or the wrong thing to do.
Sure. I mean, Parliament should have been consulted about it. I mean, the government doesn't need to consult Parliament, legally speaking, but they should have had a debate about it to talk about the risk to inflaming regional tensions, the fact that it looks hypocritical given the fact that there's inaction in relation to Gaza and Israel, but then all of a sudden there's action because the shipping lanes are being attacked in the Red Sea. There's a lot of hypocrisy around this, and the danger to civilians is massive as well.
But we know that if Parliament had been consulted, the action would have been approved. So I'll just ask you one more time. I take all your points on board. Is it the right thing to do, in your opinion?
I think that getting involved in a regional issue like that risks us being embroiled in regional tensions and potentially an escalation in regional war. So I don't think it was strategically the right thing to do.
So you let them carry on?
No, you wouldn't. You don't let them carry on, but there are other options and other ways to prevent these kind of attacks from happening. And
for example?
For example, we've seen previously that the Houthis have stopped their actions in the Red Sea when there was a ceasefire in Gaza. We look at the regional issues. We look at what's going on.
But there isn't going to be a ceasefire in Gaza. We know that. We know that from every single syllable that's come out of Benjamin Netanyahu's mouth. And I think that's a grave mistake and a huge human tragedy on an unimaginable scale, personally, but I don't think it's going to happen. And Rishi Sunak, who doesn't seem to share my view of the scale of the human tragedy, but nevertheless shares my view that the ceasefire isn't going to happen anytime soon. Ditto, I suppose, Joe Biden. What can they do? They only really have a binary choice here. Do we retaliate or don't we?
Apply pressure to other
They've tried. He's spoken to Iran, Biden, at length. He's intervened with them at length. I'm
talking about if you look at the situation in the Red Sea and what the Houthis are doing, it's clear that it's truncated by the situation in Gaza. Apply pressure to Israel to have a ceasefire. There are Israeli families in Israel who are protesting against their government for the release of hostages, calling for a ceasefire.
That's not going to happen. It should, but it's not. So you can't have the protection of the counterfactual, as things stand with the decisions they've already made, should you retaliate when fighters launch drone attacks on your ships?
If the retaliation is targeted against weapons bases and designed to stop the Houthis,
which I think it was. Discreet is the word they use. And it makes you wonder why we can't have discreet attacks in Gaza, doesn't it? Discrete. Thank you, Gary. I fell into my own trap there of defending my own position, defending my own opinion, whereas, of course, as Gary reminds us, there's a heck of a lot of stuff going on that you won't even have taken into account while forming your own opinion on this. So, we'll come back to it, but the idea of the world being imperiled as a consequence of this, the alternative shipping route that one caller referred to, essentially it would involve ships leaving Taiwan and going right around the bottom of the Cape of Good Hope and then coming round through the South Atlantic Ocean into the North Atlantic Ocean and docking in the UK. It is remarkable, isn't it? The Red Sea and the Suez Canal essentially constituting a shortcut that cuts the world in half. I just find stuff like that absolutely bonkers. Probably going to get a little bit more into domestic politics after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11. Okay, I don't know. We should probably just have something on record for this bit of the programme where I pontificate on the... Well, no, I don't. I sort of wonder out loud what we can do to break the stranglehold that print media has upon the rest of public discourse. I don't know. I try, but sometimes it fails. Well, maybe it never actually fails. I don't want to tempt fate. But we shouldn't still be having conversations based upon what's in the newspapers, particularly when with right-wing newspapers, a lot of what's in them is bought and paid for by dodgy so-called think tanks or polling that has been paid for by the same people that secretly fund the dodgy so-called think tanks. And then I've written a book about how awful it is, but even I have no choice but to follow the agenda that they're trying to set, even if I dedicate myself to trying to sort of shine a light on it or blow it up. Think of us as a little drone in the context of that conversation. Speaking of recordings, this is all backfired a bit. We've got 21 entries for Smear Keir, and counting. So I don't even know if we're ever going to be able to hear all of the ones that we've already got. Keith, have you got them all there? So you don't even know what Smear Keir is, do you? A mild example of Smear Keir this morning would have all of the right-wing newspapers and therefore the BBC, which, bless it, can't help following their lead when the voices are so loud, trying to turn the situation in Yemen into a criticism of Keir Starmer, who I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, has been pretty clear on the deployment of British troops on foreign soil will always, under a Keir Starmer government, involve a vote in Parliament. The same does not apply to bombing strikes or support for bombing strikes. But the headlines, alongside the story of what's actually happening, involve things like Starmer denies flip-flopping or Starmer denies changing mind. And so the whole narrative, you can see what they're doing, is already dedicated to trying to attack him for things that are not really worthy of attack. It began when it emerged that he'd bought a field next to his parents' house so that his late mother could look after distressed donkeys. And when she subsequently became disabled and immobile, one of her great joys was to look out of the window at the donkeys in the field. Keir Starmer bought that field. Therefore, you cannot trust him to be Prime Minister. That was the position adopted by the Mail on Sunday a long time ago. It was followed by 13 front pages about a perfectly innocuous curry that he had while Boris Johnson was breaking laws like it was going out of fashion, lying about it, and then lying about it. So that again was an example of Smear Keir. So we've got a recurring feature called Smear Keir, and for reasons that I don't understand, LBC, my capital is so low that I can never get proper production or official sort of stabs and jingles or 20th birthday celebrations, 20th anniversary celebrations on the I need nothing like that. Just no, I'm too small. I know what you're thinking, but you've got the biggest audience. I know, you'd think it mattered. Hey ho, but apparently size isn't everything. So we've launched Smear Keir, but without a jingle, without a stab. And we've now got 21 to choose from. And I don't know what to do because I can't play out 21 things. And if I play them out at different times on different days, no one will hear all of them. Well, all right, you will, but a lot of people don't tune in for 3 hours a day and listen very, very. So I don't know what to do. Do you know what I am? Yet again? Yeah? I'm a victim of my own success. Again. Smearcare is so popular now that we may never ever be able to hear all of the jingles that have been submitted for consideration for becoming the official Smearcare jingle. But you leave that with me. You leave that with me. That's why I'll take care. I'll take care of that. I'm going to turn your attention next to this, with that little caveat of wondering whether or not we should be ignoring the conversations that the right wing, whoever it is that secretly funds the lurch to the right in this country, wants us to be having. I think we can do it as long as we poo-poo what's happening. Who exactly, the rather splendid Politico playbook asked this morning, paid for this poll? We don't know. The Telegraph reports that it was commissioned by a group of Tory donors called the Conservative Britain Alliance, working with David Frost. You remember him, the fellow that negotiated the withdrawal agreement, got a peerage for it, and then insisted before the ink was dry that it was absolutely awful and we should abandon it immediately. He now gets paid to write columns for the Daily Telegraph, despite having been proven wrong about almost everything. The thing is, if you're secretly funding a lurch to the right because you think it will allow you to become even richer than you are already, you'll sign up anybody. It doesn't matter whether their IQ is in single figures or double. They're great for you. Very hard to find anyone with their IQ in triple figures. But you'll sign up anyone. So you've got Frosty on the case, you've got Nick Timothy on the case, you've got this Tim Stanley fella on the case. He wrote something the other day about how if the post office were in the Gaza Strip, then all the lefties would be up in anger. At least I think he did. I haven't got the time or the energy to check whether the headlines that I see popping up on my social media are real or are generated as satire. So that's where the Telegraph sits now, both simultaneously down a sewer and slightly to the right of the average far-right political position. The comment pages are one of the most wonderful things you could hope to encounter. If you like a laugh, turn to the comment pages of the Daily Telegraph every day. You get lines like, Liz Truss's budget is the very best of my lifetime. All sorts. Anyway, I digress. They've published the poll. Playbook had a look at Conservative Britain Alliance shortly after the poll published by the Telegraph today and paid for by the Conservative Britain Alliance hit the newsstands. Guess what they found when they looked for references to the Conservative Britain Alliance, this new grouping allied to David Frost that has commissioned polling for the Daily Telegraph designed to provide front pages warning against the 1997-style wipeout. Go on, have a guess. All right, I'll give you a clue. They only found one reference on the whole of the internet to the Conservative Britain Alliance. Guess where it was? Yeah, it was in the article that's on the front page of today's Telegraph. The first and so far only time that the Conservative Britain Alliance has appeared anywhere in the UK media is as the secret funders of a poll designed to provide a Daily Telegraph front page warning against a massive wipeout for the Tories. So why are they doing it? I think the answer is pretty obvious. They're doing it because they want the Conservative Party to lurch even further to the right. They want it to be further right than a party that can put Suella Braverman in the Home Office twice. Further to the right. And they are seeking to spook potential supporters by warning in particular that I'm so sorry, if I haven't got Henry Riley here, I can't remember which party is which, but one of the ones that begins with R, the Replace Party, or the Reclaim Party, or the Reform Party, the one that Farage's funny little friend presents or leads. That's Reform. So they're trying to warn all the Tory readers that might vote Reform that if you do, they won't win any seats, but they will let Labour win more constituencies than they otherwise would. So it's really, really simplistic, lazy propagandising. But as we've established, that's what the Daily Telegraph exists for these days. Across much of its pages, there are still 2 or 3 decent journalists on the paper, but I don't think any of them are writing comment pieces. The most extensive election poll in 5 years predicts that party will retain just 169 seats. And, of course, the determinate. Well, there's 2 questions for you. There's always 2 questions, isn't there? What are your favourite little kind of recurring motifs on this programme? Is it when I say there are 2 questions here and then I ask you about 17? I like to do that at the top of most. There are 2 questions here and then I ask you about 17 different questions. I think I'm going to confine this to 2 questions. The first is one of my favourite questions, actually, ever. And, of course, we did this a bit under the last Labour leader from the other side of the road, but the answer was almost always the same, is you have voted Labour all your life, but you're not going to vote Labour now. Why not? And it was either, depending upon your political history, it was either your disdain for Jeremy Corbyn or your desire to get Brexit done. One of those positions intellectually valid, one of them sadly not. But it doesn't matter when you're casting your vote, does it? The question of why you cannot quite believe that you are currently not intending to vote Conservative is one that absolutely fascinates me, and is one that I'm going to be asking you this hour. The other one is probably not going to get the same level of response, but it is at least as fascinating. And you don't have to have read How They Broke Britain to be across the completely successful, it's not even an annexation, it's an occupation of huge swathes of the right-wing media by the unaccountable secret wealth that funds think tanks and and places stories and commissions polls. You don't even know their names. I paid a fortune for this polling. You don't even know who they are. You don't even know their names. And I'd put a few quid on some of them having got some rather nice and juicy PPE contracts back in the day, though. But what does that mean? People want to push the Conservative Party even further to the right. What does that mean to you? 0345 6060 973. So I've got two questions for you. You can answer one of them or both of them. At this point in the programme, I'd rather you didn't ring in and answer neither of them. The first one is a question for the ages, and I'm going to ask it a few times as the general election approaches. You are listening to this programme now, regardless of our relationship, where you've been and gone and in relation to what you think of me or my politics. I'm interested in your politics today. You are listening to this programme today, and perhaps for the first time, you've just clocked that you cannot quite believe that you are not going to vote Conservative at the next election. Now, it might be that you're going to vote for the Replace Party, although I grant you that these days you're unlikely to ring me. You don't need to ring me. You've got entire television stations dedicated to the idea that you're not a thick racist. So you could be going even further to the right of the Tory party, whatever that means. But it's more likely that you're a thoughtful Tory, but a lifelong Tory, or at least a committed Tory, a proper Tory. You're not historically a wavering voter, all right? The question is, why? So the qualification is, I can't quite believe that I'm not voting Tory at the next election. That's the qualification for joining in. I can't quite believe that I'm not voting Tory at the next election. And the answer is, or rather the question is, why? What is it? A combination of things? A single thing? An individual? An occurrence? An episode? A direction of traffic? A policy? A movement? 0345 6060 973. Tories facing 1997 style wipeout, says secretly funded opinion polling designed to encourage a lurch to the right for the current Tory party. But the numbers tally with the broader polling picture. They're facing a big loss. And that is contingent upon people like you already knowing, to the degree at least that you would tell an opinion pollster this, that you're not going to vote Tory. You maybe don't even know how you are going to vote. Although, of course, if the appeal of Keir Starmer and his shadow cabinet is the answer to the question of why you're not voting Tory, then I want to hear that as well. But I'm more interested in the decision not to do it. Okay? 0345 6060 973. You can't quite believe it, but you're not going to do it. Why not? And then question number two is, what does a lurch to the right for a Tory party that can put Suella Braverman in the Home Office twice, Priti Patel once, it can put Liz Truss, you want to talk about economic far right, practices. You can put Liz Truss in Downing Street itself. What on earth does a lurch to the right look like for the current Conservative Party? And the number is the same, regardless of whether you want to answer one question, the other question, or both questions. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's a funny one. 20 after 11 is the time. I don't know if I've articulated it well. Gavin Barwell knows what I'm talking about. He was a chief of staff, I think, under Theresa May. So, not someone who I am going to be agreeing with politically on many issues. But talking about David Frost, the man who negotiated the withdrawal agreement and then tried to abandon it after getting a peerage, writing in the Telegraph today about the problems that the party faces. Frost, writes Gavin Barwell, is one of the people who helped to dig the hole that the party is in, and therefore one of the last people it should now take advice from. And it is, there's this extraordinary situation for the Tory party. I think, how big a part of it is Brexit, I wonder? This doubling down on being wrong. Determined wrongness almost, but I don't know. It's a question, not an opinion. You have this bizarre idea that we just need to do more of what we're doing, while all of the polling shows that what you're doing is alienating voters. I can't get a question out of that at the moment. I'm not. It's not quite there, which is why I've asked you two. But if you can actually mash them together, then you can go to the top of the class. Why are the Tory, a certain wing of the Tory party, represented by the kind of people that fund think tanks and opinion polls and have a season ticket at the Daily Telegraph, why are they convinced that electoral success lies in doing more of the things that are currently alienating voters? Is it the same as saying, there is a good Brexit out there, but it goes to a different school? I don't know. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. You can't quite believe it, but you won't be voting Tory. 22 after 11, why not? Bill's in Brentwood. Bill, what would you like to say?
Why am I not going to vote Tory again after all these years? Because they're epically useless. They've had a majority since 2016, 2017?
2010, mate.
No, that was with the Lib Dems when they've had an unqualified majority.
No, fair enough. 2015 then, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one. And on the two very big issues of that period, Brexit and COVID, they've done poorly, to say the least. On the two subsequent issues, less important issues, the economy and immigration, they've also failed. And on the economy, which is supposed to be their trademark thingy, well, to fail on that, how dismal is that when that's the thing you've been banging on for years about, that you're so good at running the economy?
Yeah.
So, yeah, hopeless. Even worse than John Major's government, which...
So can well, you voted for him as well. You didn't stop voting Tory after.
I did. I know.
Yeah.
But this is, I mean, that...
Has it ever crossed your mind?
John Major's government was awful, but even worse.
Yeah. Let's look at one element of this, and I don't want to make any presumption, so let me just clarify. I suspect that you want less immigration and a stronger economy.
I think less immigration would be a good idea, because I think principally immigration displaces the lower levels of English people, pushes them onto welfare, and that is not good for the social contract.
Okay. What if you can't have a stronger economy without high immigration? What do you do then?
Above my pay grade, Squire.
Well, it's not, is it? Because it's actually the basis of your voting intention. So you're drawn to one of these weird new parties that begins with R, are you, Bill?
Only with reluctant. R is for reluctant.
That'll do. I can't remember who's leading that one.
I would quite like to see the Conservatives get the Canadian 1995 treatment of going down from 165 to 2. Serve them right is all I would say. But
you see, your opinions are very strong. And yet the minute I point out the fairly well-established fact that you can't really have economic growth without relative... No, hang on.
No.
It really is. Economic growth without relatively high immigration, especially in a country with an ageing population and a low birth rate, it's actually impossible. But it doesn't make the tiniest dent in your certainty, does it? You just say it's below my pay grade. What if it's true?
Above. Well, what if it's true? That's the question.
Yeah,
is it
it
true?
is. That is the
You were
question.
talking a few minutes ago about think tanks. Those sort of arguments are put forward by the party people, aren't they?
No, they're not. The think tanks I'm talking about, Bill, are the ones that don't reveal their funding and encourage people like you to believe that you can have economic growth without having relatively high immigration. And that had its apotheosis during Liz Truss's premiership, which I presume you were unhappy with.
Well, I thought she was a bit stupid.
Yes, but she holds the same opinions as you.
No, she doesn't, because you put
She does. She wants economic growth and lower immigration. She categorically does hold the same opinions as you.
But I didn't say that. You asked me that question, but I didn't answer it. Had you been listening?
You did answer it. You gave me quite a long answer as to why you wanted lower immigration. You gave me all the Daily Mail lines about English people being on welfare. Well done for not using the word indigenous. But the relationship between economic growth, if you have fewer people earning, is an impossible relationship.
Depends how the cake is sliced.
No, it doesn't. That's a silly figure of speech, Bill. It depends how the cake is sliced.
But is that one of the arguments you're putting forward is the one the think tanks put forward themselves, because they're the ones who are going to be enriched by it. I mean,
Bill, you're literally the poster boy for the kind of think tanks I'm talking about. You believe in the impossible.
You keep telling me what I'm saying.
I just keep reminding you what you said when you rang in. You want a stronger economy and lower immigration. That's literally your reason for ringing in. You said the two things they failed on, didn't you, are the economy and immigration.
Well, then if you're saying the two things are joined at the hip...
Well, of course they are.
Why?
Why?
Why do you have... So do you have to have...
Okay, let me use the word workforce then. You see the intrinsic relationship between the workforce and the economy.
So your argument is, in essence, unless we have a perpetually growing population, we can never have economic growth. Is that the case? Now, please explain, therefore, why we had economic growth, let's say, for the sake of argument, between 1900 and, say, 1960, when we didn't have a vastly growing population. It might have been growing incrementally.
You can go back, if you want, to pre-war standards of living and pre-war distributions of wealth, but if you want to have a modern economy, either late 20th century or 21st century, then you have to have a growing workforce.
You would have a growing workforce if you didn't have 5 million people sitting on their backsides.
Okay, so you've fallen for that one as well. It's all the fault of people who aren't working. Do you know any?
No. It's not their fault at all.
Do you know any?
Yeah, I do.
Who? Tell me about the ones you know, because this is always interesting.
Well, I'm not working for a start.
Are you sitting on your backside?
No, I'm walking around the room.
But why aren't you? So you're the reason why the economy is poor, because you're not working.
That's possible.
Okay, Bill. Should we leave it here? It's been fun for me. I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Fun for me too.
Yeah, but just to be clear, your opinions are exactly the same as they were when you rang in.
Well, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you're going to vote for one of these weird new parties beginning with R that you think is further to the right than the Tories, or at least more likely to deliver lower immigration and a stronger economy.
I'm not so sure about the stronger economy, but...
Hey, who cares anyway, as long as we can bring immigration down, eh?
Well, there you are. You said
I don't care if it makes me poorer. Did you vote for Brexit, Bill?
Well, again, this is the point.
It's a question, Bill, not a point. Did you?
Of course I did, because I don't mind about being poorer.
As long as there's fewer foreigners around. Am I right?
Oh, don't be dopey. Do you think that... Look at the Scots Nats. They're quite happy to vote to be poorer for independence. No one criticises them.
No, they dispute completely the idea that they would be poorer, but now you know you are. You voted for a weaker economy in 2016, Bill.
We can vote for the national good rather than the personal good.
You voted for a weaker economy. That's not to the national good. So what we've done in the course of this phone call, we've gone from you saying that you're not going to vote Conservative because you want a stronger economy to saying that in 2016 you voted for a weaker economy and you think that was for the national good. That's all in the space of 6 minutes.
No, it's all because you're putting words in my mouth and not actually letting me say what I wanted to say.
Oh, go on then, say it now.
No, let's say goodbye.
No, say it now, quick. Don't go, quick, say it. Good Lord. Quite nostalgic for the days when people like that rang in on a rather more regular basis. But to be fair to Bill, I suppose you can see why they don't. I want a stronger economy. What did you vote for in 2016? A weaker economy. Stop putting words in my mouth, mate. Have the floor. Say what you want. Click, click, brrr. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 11. Let me save you a job. If you are like our last caller, lovely Bill, and you are persuaded that we can have we need a stronger economy, i.e. more money being generated by the economy, but fewer people working here, fewer people coming here, and all we have to do is get all the people who are currently not working to go to work, then let me save you 5p. I'd say, yeah, you can text me and call me a bully if you want. So especially the bit where I said, go on, fill your boots, you say whatever you want to say. And unintentionally, Bill has answered one of the questions that we're asking this hour, which is what does this lurch to the right for the Tory party look like? And the problem I think they've got, and I suspect that Badenoch and Braverman and increasingly honest Bob Jenrick and recently Truss, I think they've mistaken heckling for performing. I think you could really call this the key element of the Faragification of British politics, because hecklers can say whatever they want. Hecklers can say whatever they want. Opposition leaders can say whatever they want, but they do so with the knowledge that they might be in power one day, and indeed that they hope to be in power one day. People who haven't got a hope in hell of getting into power can say what they want. And that's how you end up with people like Bill believing what Bill believed. That's the mystery for me of the Tory party. Is it Trump? Are they looking at Trump and thinking, no, you don't need to actually bear any relationship to reality. You don't need to obey the rules of gravity, the laws of political gravity. You really can persuade people that up is down, that black is white, that you lost, that you won an election that you lost. I genuinely don't know what motivates these people who are... I mean, there can't be enough Bills out there to win a general election, can there? Or can there? I don't know. But you can't quite believe that you're going to vote Tory. You can't quite believe that you're not going to vote Tory, and I want you to ring me and tell me why. So I don't know how we're going to do this. I've got 21 stings for smear care. I'm going to play you the first 5, right? And I'm going to do it quite unscientifically. Just text me the number of the one that you like, and I'll put them through to the next round. All right? So we'll do it in rounds of 5. If it appears on my inbox, 84850 is the best way to do it. Try not to tweet. A text is just a lot easier. No, you can tweet, actually, but tweet to LBC. Don't tweet to me. So tweet to 84... I don't want my inbox crammed up with this rubbish. Tweet to 84850 or tweet or text to 848... I'm just going to play you 5 in a row, okay? So this is number... You've heard the first 2 or 3 already, but it's only fair. This is number 1 from Mike.
Smear kill.
This is number 2 from Michael.
Smear care. Smear care.
That's weird. Number 3 from Bob.
Smear care.
Oh, that's quite good. It's a pun on here, isn't it? I quite like that one. Number 4 from Phil.
Listen here, it's smear care.
There's 21 of these. What have we done? Number 5 from Peter.
I've got an idea. Smear care.
Okay, that's the first 5. If you like any of those, give me a number from 1 to 5. 11:37 is the time. Howard is in Billericay. Howard, what would you like to say?
First of all, I definitely like number 4, closely followed by number 3.
Yes, I think I'm the other way round, actually. Number 3, closely followed by... But on we go.
I'm a lifelong Tory voter. With a bit of regret now. I voted for Brexit.
Sure.
Not to do with the immigration. I suppose it was a sovereignty question for me. And with even more regret, I voted for Boris.
Yes.
I was
probably for the same reason, though. You still in 2019 thought that there was a nation improving Brexit that was deliverable, and he created, I think, very successfully the idea that he would be able to deliver it.
I think a lot of it was just, I just felt that the whole country, and especially Parliament, was in stalemate. and just something needed to happen.
It was. I mean, that's the point everybody misses about 2019. It was another contrick by Cummings and Johnson, but it was actually, unlike Brexit, it was built on the truth. The country was in a stalemate because the people who were determined to prevent the nation from going down a path of utterly unnecessary self-harm still had agency in Parliament, so he had to get rid of them in order to get it over. But anyway, we digress. Why now? What has dropped? What penny has dropped?
So I was quite hopeful when Rishi got in. I was really disappointed that Truss beat him in the first round.
Right.
Because I could see that for the disaster that it was. For a country that was jumping headfirst into high inflation, her answer seemed to be to throw more money at it, which no one seemed to get who had a vote to put her in. So when he got in, I was quite hopeful. I thought, all right, he'll get a handle on the economy, and the economy is doing much better. Inflation's coming down.
But that's not nothing to do with him, has it, as you well know?
I suppose a bit of good timing helps in that respect. Yeah. But everything else, the economy aside, it's just been a catalogue of errors. First and foremost is the Rwanda policy, and just about everything else. He was always going to have a good handle on the economy or good interpretation of what needs to be done.
Listen, I've just done 2 rounds with Bill. I'm not going to have another ding dong on this, but I am drawn to the idea that you think Rishi Sunak's handling of the economy has been impressive. And you're familiar with the cost of living and interest rates, are you, Howard?
Very, very.
So talk me through how they're good at the moment.
Well, no, I didn't say they were good. I said they were getting better.
Oh, okay.
And all this takes, so inflation is coming down.
Yes,
that
but that's gravity.
Help the men in the supermarket.
That's essentially gravity, isn't it? And indeed, the reduction in energy costs caused by the recalibration of the sort of post-Ukraine energy markets. It's got absolutely nothing to do with Rishi Sunak.
Okay, I'll concede that point.
If it was always this easy, I wouldn't have a show.
Oh, sorry.
No, nothing at all.
No, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong, James.
That's
better. Itself.
Exactly. How do you know? I just believe it. I've got no facts whatsoever. And anyway, why won't you let me speak? What moment then was it? Because it sounds like an accumulation of issues rather than oh my days, I can't support this lot anymore.
I think it's been everything since Boris.
Okay.
So the Christmas before he stepped down, or the
didn't really step down. Again, I'm sorry to nitpick, but you mean the Christmas before he ran away rather than face the consequences of his own actions in Parliament.
You've nailed it. Exactly.
The Parliament, the sovereignty of which you voted for.
Yes.
And he repeatedly ignored.
Yes.
Okay. So
the weeks leading up to Christmas, there was just one thing after another. That's when the Partygate stories. I think that's when they started to break. The lobbying issue. I can't remember the MP who was caught up in that. Boris trying to change the rules
Patterson,
around that.
Owen Patterson. It was originally.
That's it.
Yeah.
Boris trying to change the rules. So if you were found to be acting in a way unbecoming an MP, you didn't have to step down. You just
just change the rules. You can have Jacob Rees-Mogg led that. That save Owen. So just it's the cronyism then. The cronyism and the incompetence.
Boris just holding on for far too long before he ran away, in your words, and that's about right. Liz Truss was just absolutely dreadful.
Yes.
Absolutely awful.
I'm not going to do any nitpicking here.
And it hasn't really got any better. I think they've just been in for power too long.
But what's interesting about you is for you, it was still all to play for when Sunak got the job. Your vote was still in play when Sunak got the job.
Yeah, because I thought...
So how's he fluffed it up then?
Well, because nothing's really changed.
No. And the Rwanda thing, you did mention the Rwanda thing, because you find it ridiculous and or unpleasant.
I find it unpleasant. There's got to, illegal immigration, it's illegal, so there should be something done about it.
In a sense, it's illegal.
Yeah.
The idea is that you process the applications and then you decide who had the right to try to come here and who didn't, whereas they treat everybody, by using that word, they treat everybody as not having the right to come here. Can I ask you an interesting question? I don't know how, you've probably seen this story already. From which African country, I'm doing this in the style of a Christmas quiz, Howard, so I hope you've got your pen and pencil ready. From which African country, heavily featured in the news in 2023, did the United Kingdom accept 6 asylum applications from in 2022?
I'm guessing the answer is Rwanda.
Yes, top of the class to Howard.
thank you very much.
Yes, like that perfectly safe country of Rwanda, from which in 2022 this government accepted 6 asylum applications. The British government has accepted 6 people from Rwanda since it signed its controversial deportation agreement with the African country in 2022. Things you won't be reading in the Daily Mail, well, things you won't be hearing certain characters get very exercised about, chapter 564. Thank you, Howard. Number 3, clear winner, yeah, on the first round. Number 3, clear winners. Everybody got that? Are we agreed? Number 3, a clear winner? Yeah, well done. That was Bob. I liked that one as well. It wasn't really a jingle, though. It was, well, they're stabs anyway, aren't they? They're not jingles. They don't have to be musical. But number 3 was quite... Did you like number 3? I like number 3. It's coming up to 11:45. Jeremy and Wigginton will be up first after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you think we should do them all today? Do you think we should do all 21 today? Because then people can at least... Oh, we'll wait and see. Anyway, I'm not doing any more for a while. Jeremy's in Wigginton. Jeremy, what would you like to say?
Well, it's interesting because I'm going through this kind of twice because I'm obviously from America originally, but voted conservative ever since I came over here.
Sure.
And, and you can draw some similarities like you do sometimes, but...
Not many, though, I hope.
Well, not a whole lot.
No.
But I think partly you can draw similarities to the second question you asked about why they're lurching to the right.
Yes, go on.
But it's because I think in most cases they kind of base it on how to do the least damage as far as the conservatives go over here because they know they're going to lose.
Yeah.
And they think, somebody obviously thinks, that they can hopefully hold on to a few more seats by doing this.
So they've lost the middle, as it were.
Yes. Yeah,
the centre cannot
gone.
hold, and therefore they need to either grab the people who've been seduced by other parties, largely beginning with R, or they need to motivate people who are minded not to vote at all. And they think that constituency of people is the one that wants the sort of messages that they're offering up about Rwanda and the rest of it.
Yes. Because, some people don't pay that close attention, and they only get a few bits and bobs here. They hear a couple of things that they don't necessarily hate without much of detail in it, and they go that way. So I think that's why the conservatives are doing that over here. They kind of lost me a while back.
Go on.
I voted, up until 2019, I voted conservative. I voted for David Gauck in 2019 because he ran as an independent.
Yeah.
But I was kind of always still holding out hope that maybe somebody with, some sense might come along and say something. And then it became increasingly apparent that every time anybody with any sense came along and said anything, they were told to be quiet. And
well, worse, they were chucked out.
Or chucked out of the party, like you say, that kind of thing. So I just kind of I gave up. So I'm not saying I would never vote conservative again, but they're going to have to go through one heck of an identity change before I'll ever consider it. And like I said, I'm kind of going through the same thing back home as well.
Yeah, I'm much worse, I presume, back home. That's a sort of... I mean, we're a long way from anybody supportive of Rishi Sunak saying this country needs a dictator. And Rishi Sunak... I mean, Trump started saying it out loud, hasn't he? Warnings that democracy itself are under threat. He's not doing much to challenge them, is he? Well, or even refute them.
Some of that is hyperbolic. I don't think
we said that last time. We said that about the voting machines. We said that about the losing the election. We said that about January the 6th. I mean, when do we stop saying that?
Well, personally, I don't think he's going to get the nomination.
Do you not?
No, I don't. I think, he might win the primary, but I think when it comes down to it, I just don't see it happening. And secondly, I don't think he can win. I know a lot of people back home think he can, and I do agree that because the middle has been given up, basically, and every election is so close, and every election is within the margin of error, it's always possible, but I just don't see it.
No, well, I hope you're right, but I don't know what the answer is to guarding against that gut reaction or safety blanket of saying it's hyperbolic to fear this, when every single previous time when that word has been used about Donald Trump, it turned out not to be. In a couple of sentences, Jeremy, the direction of traffic in terms of policy that the Tories have taken that you object to.
Well, I hate Rwanda.
Okay.
That was, I mean, I don't want to call it the straw that broke the camel's back, but it kind of, when that policy kept getting talked about over and over again, and I'm sitting there thinking all the problems that we have with NHS and schools, all of which I'm attuned to, and the cost of living, and I'm like, this is what you're spending your time on. I mean, obviously I'm an immigrant as well, so it kind of...
Well, that doesn't stop people from holding positions different from yours about other immigrants, does it? But I respect your position rather more than I would theirs. I mean, that is extraordinary. Do you know, to my shame, I haven't turned that into a substantive phone-in yet about this idea. But he's done it. Jeremy's done it. It's the same question. It's the same question. Why are they expending so much political energy on a Rwanda plan that is highly unlikely to work and won't make the blindest bit of difference to anything, even if it does work, and which consistently and completely humiliates them, up to and including news today that we've accepted 6 asylum seekers from there since the deal was signed? Why do they keep doing it? Answer, they are possibly admitting that they have lost the middle ground. And they've lost the centre-right now, which of course upsets some supporters of the Labour Party. And therefore the only place where they can pick up as yet uncast votes in the coming general election is from somewhere to the right of 30p Lee and Suella Braverman. And what do they stand for? Nothing at all except the promise to be horrible to foreigners, whether it's asylum seekers or immigrants in general. I mean, is there anything else? So, today's Daily Telegraph front page, thank you, Jeremy, you've proved to be the Rosetta Stone for me on this, by that reference right at the end there. Today's Daily Telegraph front page is designed to encourage the Parliamentary Conservative Party to become even more xenophobic. And that's incredible, because xenophobia got Brexit over the line. Xenophobia got Boris Johnson into Downing Street. Xenophobia is responsible for the fact that in private, all of these politicians have to acknowledge the importance of immigration, but in public they have to keep committing to it coming down. And the people who are going to feel their vote change or their vote harden every time they hear a foreign accent or see a brown face, that's the only votes they're left fighting for. It's incredible, isn't it? I wonder what that bloke who rang in all those years ago to tell us that he was going to vote Brexit because there were too many brown faces in Tesco. Wonder what he feels about the Tory party at the moment. I bet he's not going to vote for them. 11:54 is the time. Neil's in Newbury. Neil, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
I was driving home from my dog walk and this came on.
Yes.
And usually I settle back and think, well,
I'll let it wash over me.
But no, who's going to speak up on this one? I was pulling up my chair in the front row. And then I thought of 2 words, really. And I wasn't sure whether they were strong enough that I could offer them up as any reason to never vote Conservative again. But because they're 2 really important values and qualities that we say to our children, I thought, well, maybe they are. And that's humanity and empathy. And that's what I think has gone. It's sailed off a long time ago, and it's taken me so long to realise it.
Well, I'm glad that we helped. So what you're casting us in the role almost of a sort of intellectual laxative this morning that's managed to loosen your pipes of thought. And it ties in with what I just stumbled across while I was talking to Jeremy, doesn't it? It ties in with the electoral promise that they're reaching for now with this secretly commissioned or paid for polling in the Telegraph, that we need to be less empathetic. We need to do more dehumanising in order to hoover up those votes that are still in our reach, because we've given up on all the ones that aren't.
Well, it was very interesting years ago when Jeremy Corbyn stood at the dispatch box for the first time against, it would have been against David Cameron, wouldn't it? And he talked about kindness and politics, and there was a sort of sneery riposte to it. And I really remember that. And at the time, I'd probably cast that aside. And all those things in a line are coming home now to roost. And I'm very lucky to be going to Africa later this week. And I'm going to the Gambia. And the Gambia is interesting because that's where something called the back way starts, which is where a lot of young men in particular start that journey up through Africa, across the Mediterranean, and then onwards, and they've become this immigration that there seems to be the only thing anybody's talking about. Yeah. And because I've met people that have taken that back way, they're real people, and that to me is, and I try and explain this to even my parents-in-law, and it's very difficult for people to see people as any more than the immigration word until they've met those people.
And that's why the word like illegal is so powerful, isn't it? And so unhelpful, really, to describing reality, because it's such a dehumanizing description and bleeds in effortlessly to a kind of negative view of all immigration, not just asylum seeking. And I mean, it should really be the other way around. If you're motivated by xenophobia, the refugees and the asylum seekers should be the ones that you're going to go a bit easier on than the people who just want to come here to work. So no, empathy and humanity. When did it leave the building, do you think? Roughly.
I'm tempted to say just post Brexit, which is a long time ago, and it's a long time to keep voting for the same thing, and then to vote in 2019 for Boris is akin to the Turkey thing, isn't it? Really,
I suppose so. It was a Hobson's choice, though. I think in 2019 for a variety of reasons, but and then it didn't disappear entirely, probably until just after that result. But I do remember the mood that swept the nation, and the celebrations in the sun about there won't be any Polish shops on your high street anymore, when they'd been at great pains in the run up to insist that there was nothing xenophobic about any of it. There won't be any Polish shops anymore. How does that? I mean, it always goes hand in hand. You start off othering that section of society, and the next thing you know, you're othering that section and that section and that section and that section, and then you ring in a radio station to claim that the economy would be fine if only all those malingering work-shy layabouts got off their backsides and went back to work, and then admit you're one of them, as happened earlier this hour. But you'd have to use rewind on the global player to avail yourself of that extraordinary exchange. Well, not extraordinary if you've been listening to the programme for a few years, but probably extraordinary if you're a relatively recent arrival. I'm going to return to this. I still haven't nailed it. I was very lucky with the calls this hour, for which I'm grateful, but I haven't quite got to, I tell you what it is, and I suspect Neil's the same, and our friend from Kentucky. I don't want it to be as simple as that. I don't like to overcomplicate things, but I don't want to end up with as bleak a position. But everything the Tories are doing, from trying to scaremonger on the front of the Telegraph today to pretending that the Rwanda thing is a very big deal, is literally designed to hoover up the remaining votes of the most unpleasant people in our population.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:03 is the time. Big story that, isn't it? 14,000 elderly care beds closed in England alone last year as financial and staffing pressures force hundreds of homes to close. Sheila Fogarty rather led the line on coverage of these issues, with us sort of bringing up the rear, and we may get stuck into that tomorrow. But part of me's frightened of that topic more than almost any other, just because of my own family demographics. But 90% of hospital beds are full on average. Thousands of people who are fit to leave the hospital unable to do so. So it affects every level of society. And yet today the Tory party, the Tory government, is dedicating itself to an internal row about the Rwandan deportation deal. I just want you to think about this. We're going to talk about drug shortages in a minute. Not that kind of drug shortage, you old hippie. I mean medicines. We're going to start, not dope droughts or whatever you call them. We're going to talk about medicine shortages in a minute and how it's affecting you and why it's happening. But I do just want to take a minute to look at that. Take that story. Fears for NHS patients' lives as number of crucial drugs in short supply increases. 14,000 care home beds in England alone have gone in the last year as financial and staffing pressures force hundreds of care homes to close. And the Conservative Party is spending today, the Conservative government is spending today dealing with an internal civil war about a policy to deport asylum seekers to a country from which we are accepting asylum seekers because it is deemed unsafe for them. And some of the biggest idiots in that conversation are insisting that we withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, despite the fact that the president of Rwanda, I beg your pardon, I think the foreign minister, but a senior member of the Rwandan government has made it clear that membership of the European Convention on Human Rights is a crucial part of any deal. So I don't know whether these people just don't know the facts because they are, if you like, their brains have been boiled by their bigotries, or whether they know the facts and don't care because they're trying to appeal to people that we identified in the last hour. So sort of, we want to deport lots of... So we're never going to deport people, but the louder we make the promise that we are... So how can you be having a conversation about withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights when the country to which you want to deport asylum seekers forever has said that we won't take anyone if you do that? And yet still these weirdos are jumping up and down calling for it. It's actually insane. And I guess if everything was plain sailing domestically and economically, you'd think, oh, get on with it. You might even enjoy the circular firing squad that is taking up arms at the moment. But just those two stories there. Care homes closing at a rate of knots, causing untold damage to the NHS and families up and down the land, and fears for NHS patients' lives as numbers of crucial drugs in short supply increases. Just knit those 4 or 5 stories together. The care homes, the drugs, the fact that we've taken 6 asylum seekers from Rwanda because it's unsafe, the fact that Rishi Sunak is dedicated to passing legislation that pretends it's safe, even as 6 people are coming here because it's not. The foreign minister insisting that we won't take anyone if we withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, and various Tories giving interviews in touring studios explaining that we need to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, which would, of course, have a deleterious impact upon the Good Friday. In fact, it's unsustainable in the context of Northern Ireland. And also, I think we'd have to pull out of the European Council immediately, which would put us on pretty much the same moral, ethical and legal footing as Belarus and Russia. But on we crack, talking about that instead of about this. Well, not today. Today we are going to talk about the remarkable shortage of drugs, or the burgeoning shortage. I don't want to say remarkable. I tell you what, I don't want to frighten anybody. I have a memory, I've told you this quite a few times, I think, of... if I say something, promise not to think less of me, but I didn't used to think very deeply about the impact that the programme has. I used to sort of do it in a very... I didn't have tabloid-style opinions. I'd still be on the side of empathy and humanity, but I didn't really think about how it could land in my very early days. And it was one email that made me stop. It's often an email rather than a call. Sometimes it's a call, but sometimes the emails land differently, or the texts or the tweets or whatever it may be. The one about pets, you'll remember, when I used to be quite performatively obnoxious about people I would describe as loving their pets more than they love their loving animals more than they love humans. And someone texted me, an older gentleman texted me to tell me that he'd lost his wife a few months previously, and if it wasn't for their dogs, he doesn't think he'd have got through it. And I remember thinking, well, that's that then. I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to be able to do that with a clear conscience. Go after people who are deriving more emotional support from animals than they are from human beings. And it's nice, it's quite liberating to stop being obnoxious or bigoted in that way. I can't recommend it enough. And the NHS one was simply me doing a story. This is a bit different because I wasn't being performatively obnoxious, but I was, I think, perhaps being a little provocative or sensationalist. I think it was during sepsis. It was during that period where you could go to hospital and come and end up sicker than you were when you arrived. And just a lady who had an operation booked for the following week said she'd been listening to the programme and she wanted to cancel the operation now. And I thought, how do you walk this tightrope of shining light into areas that perhaps you haven't noticed, or covering stories that perhaps haven't been covered in the way that we might all like, and not frightening people? And some days I think you can't. Some days you've just got to tell the story. And the story today is that pharmacists are warning that growing problems with the supply of crucial drugs are putting patients' lives at risk. An NHS drugs shortage, an unprecedented shortage of medicines in the NHS, is endangering lives. These figures are unpublished. The Guardian have got hold of them, and it shows that the number of products affected by supply chain issues has doubled in 2 years. I'm about to ask how it is affecting you as a patient or a pharmacist. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I want as many people as possibly can to join in with this conversation, because it seems to me something that is of immeasurably more importance than conversations about Rwanda deportations or 30p Lee's latest belch of bovine bigotry. So what's happening in your world? A treatment for controlling epileptic seizures has been added to a drugs shortage list. Already there, treatments for conditions ranging from cancer to schizophrenia to type 2 diabetes. One of the key factors in this, I'm very sad to tell you, because there is no pleasure in being proved right about this stuff, the lower purchasing value of the pound since Brexit means it's harder for the NHS to source medicines abroad. The government has a policy of taxing manufacturers, which is suboptimal as well. The Department of Health and Social Care claims that figures given to British Generic Manufacturers Association, these are the figures that have been given to the association, forgive me, 111 drugs are on the shortages list on the 30th of October last year, 96 on the 18th of December. Supply notifications issued for a further 10 treatments to the NHS providers in the UK since then. So that's a rough doubling in shortages compared with January 2022, and the direction of traffic has been ugly, I think, since 2016. So what is going on? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 12 minutes after 12. Do you want a quick Idiot's Corner? It's not signed. It's not signed, but it is. Yeah, all right. So how would leaving the European Council put us on the same footing as Belarus and Russia, James? Is the United States, Australia and New Zealand and many other countries who are not part of the European Council on the same footing as Belarus or Russia, ? Do I need to explain why that's straight into Idiot's Corner? Do I need to? Well, I obviously need to explain it to the person that sent it, but I like to think I don't need to send it to anyone else. Okay, there's a clue in the title of the council. Shall we run through those words again? European Council. Why isn't New Zealand embarrassed by its dismissal from the European Council? Well, let's have a think, shall we, champ? What could it possibly be about New Zealand's putative membership of the European Council that doesn't really bear comparison with the United Kingdom's? Honestly, I should get a bonus for dealing with texts like yours. Anyway, first entry to Idiot's Corner this week, is it, or the second? God, it's so hard to keep up. Should we crack on with the medication story straight away, or do you want five more smear care? We'll take a call, shall we? No, we'll do 5 more smear cares. All right. So these are 6 to 10. 5 more smear care jingles, stabs, call them what you will. We'll start with Trev, who's done number 6.
Smear care.
That's absolutely. I thought we're not exercising any quality control at all. So we've rejected some. Are you joking? Are you joking me though? We've rejected some, and this is what's left. So this is post quality control. Thank you, Trev. This is number 7 from Lex.
Up next on the James O'Brien Show, smear care.
Blimey, it's good, but it's a bit long, isn't it? It needs to be more of a ding, 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 ding. Number 8 from Tim.
Mr. Speaker, that's simply yeah, and I believe in velvet socialism. We now come to the leader of the opposition
of donkey fees. Smear care with James O'Brien.
No, that's brilliant, and respect for getting in your sort of show reel almost as an impersonator. But again, I'm not sure it's doing what we need to. But I don't know. You can vote for that. That was number 8. So we've had 6, 7, and 8. Adam is at 9. It's sort of an ecclesiastical air to quite a lot of these entries, isn't there? It's a bit sort of, I don't know, a bit puts me in mind of church music. And not punch it. I don't know. Number 10, Adrian.
Smear. Here.
Again, someone demonstrating a much wider skill set than we were. We've gone from one extreme to the other there, with Trev at the beginning and Adrian at the end. So that was 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Give me your favourites out of that, and we'll see which one gets put through to the next round. After which, or rather after this, we will get stuck into how serious these drug shortages are for you.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 18 minutes after 12, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We've got another 11 to get through, so we should probably do them in the next two. We'll see how we get on, because this is a desperately important conversation, but I like to think that we've mastered the art over the years of allowing a little light into the darkness. But the story that we're concerned with, while the Conservative government concerns itself with the disgusting and ludicrous plan to deport people to a country from which we're currently accepting asylum seekers, involves the shortage of crucial drugs in this country. You as a medic, a pharmacist, or indeed a patient, or a parent, a loved one of a patient, tell me how it is affecting you. 12:19 is the time, and Richard is in Newquay. Richard, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, morning,
Hello,
James. Hi, yeah, quite a coincidence, actually. I've been chasing around all morning trying to just source some medication for my son's epilepsy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right, you don't need to be sorry.
Well, I am sorry. You can't stop me being sorry. Honestly, I'll have an argument with anyone on some days, Richard. It's absolutely disgusting behaviour. When you say chasing around, do you mean in the car or on the phone?
Well, both, everything.
Really?
Yeah, and on foot. Basically, I got a note from Epilepsy Action. It's a charity we support. And then I saw the article in The Guardian. And we've been aware of this since Brexit, because it was threatened, wasn't it? That,
it was.
Medication, what was going to happen.
Yeah, that was Project Fear, mate. Nothing to worry about there.
and basically, here we are. And my son's now in his early 30s.
Right.
We've lived with it since he was in his early teens. And it's horrendous.
Does he? And without it, he's at much greater risk of seizures.
He will have a seizure for sure without his medication. And I think just to put it out there of how serious this is.
Oh, mate, it's extraordinary.
People will be aware there's something called sudden death syndrome with epileptic seizures, and we're aware of it, not through an acquaintance, not a friend, but it's out there, and it's always in the back of your mind, and
of course it is.
As long as we're alive, we'll be protective of him. Hence, running around this morning. Big shout out to my doctor's surgery, who've been bloody marvellous.
What are they called?
The Petrock practice in St Colin Major.
Fantastic. Thank you to everybody.
They've chased around, and we've managed to source some medication for him. You'll be proud of me. I've written to my MP, where our ideologies are miles apart, but he does reply.
Good.
So I've asked him to chase it up with the Health Ministry. I've written to the manufacturer. I've spoken to the manufacturer, and all they'll tell me is it's a manufacturing issue from the manufacturers. So there's something's going on.
Well, it is, and various things are going on, as I'm sure you know. Some of it international, but some of them sadly, and you'd have to be a vampire to take any political pleasure in this sort of vindication, if you like, of what was called Project Fear. Some of it is peculiar to Britain.
And you will have seen Daniel Boffey's, or perhaps seen his article in The Guardian over the weekend, talking about the spending cap from our beloved government, on these. And the irony is you're talking about shortage of hospital beds. Only anecdotal, but the pharmacy told me this morning this is also diabetes medicines as well, not just epilepsy.
No, it is.
So we've got a shortage of hospital beds. The preventative medicine that keeps people out of hospitals is
getting harder to get hold of. Is this the toughest time you've had getting hold of the?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And in our area, basically, there was none of his medication. We managed to find some on a shelf somewhere.
Right.
And he's on what's called a slow-release medication, so it just drip feeds during the course of the day. And we were told by the charity and the manufacturer there is the ordinary standard carbamazepine available. There's none of that on the shelves anywhere. So it's basically the only word to describe it is bloody desperate.
Well, I am sorry. I know you told me not to be, but I am sorry for what you're going through, and I can chuckle with you because you got to get hold of some today. But you're already worrying about the next time, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And because it's for all of us out there, and there are lots of people out there, it's a question of we now need to prepare, ready for 4 weeks hence what's going to happen.
No, you're never off duty as a parent, are you? In any way, but as a parent who has to deal with something like that as well. Thank you, Richard. Take care. I hope things improve sooner rather than later, but there's not a great deal of grounds for optimism in that department. 87% of pharmacy workers surveyed last year said they had seen supply issues affect patients' health. Richard mentioned manufacturers. Very comprehensive report in The Guardian today, including this paragraph. The companies claim it has made the UK an unattractive place to do business. It has, they say, acted as a drag on investment. Then there is a lack of joined-up planning and communication too. That's a reference to the plummeting value of the pound. And a voluntary scheme introduced by the government in 2019 to ensure that NHS spending on branded medicines did not grow by more than 2% in a year. That's what Richard was referring to. You don't need me to remind you what has happened to inflation since 2019. So if inflation is in double figures and the cap on what you spend on certain medicines is in the very low single figures, you can buy considerably less medicine. You don't need to go to the London School of Economics to understand that. Sarah is in Cambridge. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
We've spoken before, but I don't think I told you then that I'm a consultant paediatrician.
Why didn't you tell me? Were you trying to sell me insurance or lottery tickets or something like that?
It was the Christmas before last. I phoned you from New York about the discussion with Jeremy Clarkson and Meghan Markle.
Fantastic, yes. Of course. No, you didn't reveal that you were a consultant paediatrician at that
No.
time for perfectly reasonable reasons.
Of course, not relevant.
So why have you called in today?
Well, because this is incredibly topical. I'm incredibly pleased that you're discussing it because it is absolutely dire. In paediatrics, this gentleman that has just spoken is talking about his child's epilepsy. My other incredible concern is about medication for ADHD, which is at times totally absent from pharmacies or at times only available in certain doses that may not be appropriate for children. Or you need to, for example, raise the dose to a certain point. You don't want to raise it further, but the dose that you need isn't available, so you have to put a child on a higher dose than you normally would like to. But the availability is the issue. Because it is a controlled drug and you can only prescribe it for 28 to 30 days at a time,
right.
You are in the same, and the pharmacists are not allowed to earmark a set of medications if they have it in stock and put them aside for a child. You're in this repeated cycle every 30 days. So in my case, for example, many of the children that I look after, I have had to change the medication they're on 2-3 times because that's the only thing that's available, apparently available. And then by the time that I need to write the prescription for the new medication, it's processed, it's not available in the pharmacy anymore. Or it's available, but it's available in all sorts of different places. And what I have now started to do on a repeated basis, it sounds ridiculous, but it's true, is as soon as my clinic is over, because I have a very good working relationship with the pharmacies, I go around the pharmacies and collect bits
physically
of what they've got left.
Physically, you drive around.
Physically in my car.
And that's
with a coffee.
Oh my days! And that's in addition to your duties. That's not. I mean, that's off the books, as it were.
Correct.
And how often are you doing that, if I may ask?
Well, in some cases, so definitely once every 2-3 weeks. I have for the last, I would say, maybe 4 months, 5 months. Every 2-3 weeks, there is a patient for whom I cannot get the medication. I ring around the pharmacies because I cannot have them off medication for many reasons. So with ADHD, it is true that as the children are on medication for long periods of time and as you work with their behavior, you will have an opportunity at times to have little breaks from medication.
Yes.
But they are supposed to be elective. So you're supposed to take them maybe at weekends or summer holidays or Christmas or whatever.
Yes.
But so you can afford in a way for little breaks for some children. But for many, I would say the majority of children, particularly in my practice because they're still young and there's a lot that goes on with maturity and growth and behavior development, what happens is the minute that you have to stop, which in my case hasn't happened, but I know many children who've had to stop taking their medications. Now their education is disrupted, the class is disrupted, the family life is disrupted, and this poor child is in a total chaotic mess.
Well, they go back to how they were before diagnosis, and God knows how hard it is to get diagnosis and treatment. And then, so for them in particular, it must be devastating for them, because I know quite a bit about ADHD, and the failure of people around them to understand or empathise can be absolutely horrific, and probably worse if it's a relapse, because there'll be adults thinking, well, I've seen you behave.
Correct.
But differently.
Absolutely correct.
Oh, dear.
And also there are certain age groups beyond which there is very little tolerance in certain environments. It's really hard to tell a teacher who is trying to manage 3-4 children with ADHD off their medication that somehow she shouldn't lose her temper, that somehow she should somehow manage to educate the remaining 17 children, if that, in her class.
Of course.
And of course, home becomes very disruptive, because now meal times are disrupted, homework time is disrupted, social time is disrupted, behaviour around family and friends is disrupted, and it's chaos not just for this poor child who somehow feels it's for everybody. The real heartbreak is that child thinks it's all their fault because they see that the consequences are a result of their behaviour. And the whole thing is dire.
You're a wonderful advocate for them, but I wish you didn't have to be. On some elements of your work we need always and welcome, but this element of your work, I wish it wasn't necessary. And there's no. I often ask about lights at the end of tunnels, but we just don't know, do we? We don't.
No.
We don't know what the thing.
It's quite simply, as you quite rightly said, it's quite simply a supply chain issue.
And it's not unique to the UK. I do want to stress this. Brexit has, as ever, made a bad situation worse, but the European Medicines Agency has recommended about 400 medicines from an Indian laboratory be suspended, not for fears of efficacy, but for fears of supply, and the Red Sea won't help. The situation in the Red Sea won't help, and then in this country we've got the diminished pound and the extra regulatory paperwork that arises. But I wish you well. I really do. No, thank you. I don't think we'll get a better coalface report than that one. So we now have a dad and a doctor driving around their area looking for medicines, drugs that were once easily accessible. And that cap, I think, of all the things that you list, the Brexit you can't undo in the short term. The stuff that is affecting other countries, you can't expect the UK government to have avoided or negotiated. Perhaps you can, but I personally think that would be unrealistic. The war in Ukraine, other issues, the situation in the Red Sea. There are international issues, manufacturing issues perhaps. There's an EU medicines shortage working party that met last month, and we're not in the EU, so it's not unique to us. But there's 2% cap on how much the NHS trusts can spend at a time of rocketing inflation. You'd have thought somebody, they were all I know I did it at the top of the hour, but it boils my blood that they're all whining and arguing with each other about Rwanda now. Tories fighting with Tories about Rwanda, while doctors and dads are driving around the country desperately trying to get hold of drugs that they have made it harder to get hold of. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:35. So number 3 from the first 5 and number 10 from the second 5 are through. I think that seems to be a fairly clear Democratic. I mean, some honourable mentions, I think, for number 8 and number 5. But the next round of our Smear Keir jingle selection jamboree continues with entries 11 to 15. We'll start with Aidan, who is... So you just text me the number of the one that you like. Text it to 84850 or tweet it to @LBC. Don't tweet it to me, because I won't be able to see anything else. Such is the popularity of this impromptu feature, spawned entirely by the lack of respect I'm shown by my own management. Other radio presenters have, professional stuff and 20th anniversary celebrations. Did anyone get hold of Rusty Lee last week to see if she'd record a special message for me? What'd you do all day? Oh, anyway, I don't mind. It's all fine. Here's Aidan at number 11.
Smear Keir.
And another two Aidens. Honestly, it's the same Aiden. Aiden's had two. Are you allowed two? I don't know. Let's scratch that from now on. All right. So this is Aiden's second effort.
Smear Care.
Quite similar, Aiden, but interesting. Jerry is at number 13.
Are you ready to smear care?
Well, quite a lot of you have gone for a strange sound effect. Is that the software? Is that just like a button you can't help pressing? It's like when I go to B&Q, I like to ring all the doorbells. I'm 52 years old. I like to ring all the doorbells at B&Q. Is that just because you've got the software and you've made something nice and you think, I'll stick a squelch on there? Or something? It is, isn't it? You shouldn't have done. I don't think you should have done that. Mo's at 14.
Smear care, smear care.
We may have issues with that. I think he's nicked that off the Flintstones. But I liked it. And at number 15, it's Andy.
Smear care.
Yeah, okay. So that is 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15. Just text one of those numbers to 84850 or tweet it to @LBC. All right? Yeah, well, that's out of the running, I'm afraid, already, that one. But keep them coming, keep them coming. Dorian, to steer us back to the altogether more important question, and you should read The Guardian on this, actually. It's still a free website, incredibly, in commercial terms, and it's an incredible story if you want to get the facts. But the people who are making sort of 3-hour round trips to get ADHD medication or epilepsy medication, 2 of the first to come through. Also antipsychotics, which would be used to treat conditions such as schizophrenia. All sorts of problems unfolding, and the Conservative government will be spending today arguing with itself about deporting asylum seekers to a country from which we've accepted 6 asylum seekers because it's not safe for them. That's today's Conservative government's to-do list while we look at this. 12:39 is the time. Dorian is in Hemel Hempstead. Dorian, what would you like to say?
That I actually work in the pharmaceutical industry, and at the moment I'm with a local distributor, so have a bit of insight when it comes to issues with the supply chain.
Yes.
But I want to start with, I feel so sad about your last 2 callers.
Yeah, me too.
But the idea that I'm working with a distributor at the moment, and our whole mission is to get medicines to the right people. The fact that they have to go to pharmacies to go and get it is a bit symptomatic of the industry itself trying to deal with it. Yes. There's a few restrictions within at the moment that instead of certain medicines that are in shortage going to wholesalers who can distribute it to the right people in the right way, they're prioritising pharmacies, because the idea is if it's going to a pharmacy, it's going direct to a patient.
Yeah.
Not the idea of if it comes to us, we've got hospitals, pharmacies, clinics, and we can distribute wider than that central wholesaler or manufacturer can. But we know we have a wider base of customers.
I understand. I mean, these are spreading the same amount of butter differently, though. It's not increasing the amount of butter that's available, is it?
Yes, but it's more so that the idea that there's certain, full-line wholesalers that are putting restrictions in place to say, well, we don't want to give it to you as a midline wholesaler.
Okay.
We want to get it to the right people directly, which, listening to your last 2 callers...
that's why it's one of the reasons why it's happening. What is your understanding and of some of the... So, out of all the reasons behind it, what could be the most easily remedied, do you think? And I'm talking about the overall shortage now, as opposed to flaws in the distribution system. What could, if you were Prime Minister, Dorian, is there anything you could do tonight that would make things a bit easier?
I'd say sort of better relations with the EU, if I can say that.
Yes. Do you think that is impacting on things to that degree?
Yes, as...
because they've got their own problems. They do have their own problems there as well in this area. Not as acute as us. But how would better communication and cooperation help?
I mean, as you've highlighted, that they have their problems, but we've made it worse for ourselves. That at the moment we put in our own more red tape in a post-Brexit world, as a responsible person for imports. Anything that's manufactured in an EU member state for the GB market has to be signed off by someone in the UK, and there's a new sort of qualification, which is a responsible person for import to say that it's been manufactured correctly to good manufacturing practices, which you have to be part of one of the Royal Societies, being chemistry, pharmacy, biology, which for me, I'm one of them, and it costs £350 a year for me to be a member of one of the societies, to be able to have the responsibility to say, someone in the EU has signed off to say this medication is well.
I didn't know this. And how big a consignment? How big? Do you see what I mean? Because if you're taking, for example, concert equipment to the continent now, you need paperwork for every drumstick practically. How big a consignment needs a signature? Do you follow me?
Yes, but it depends on sort of in terms of how big the batch is.
So it's each, yes, but if I'm bringing in 10 different medications from the same manufacturer on the same truck, do I need to... Go on.
I would have to do 10 signatories.
Oh, and this is all post-Brexit. This is all as a consequence of getting rid of all that red tape that Jacob Rees-Mogg kept going on about.
This is when we left the EU regulations, where we all got along and all understood each other's rules. And if something was manufactured in Poland for the GB market, it's all good. We're all fine. Just bring it in.
That's what a single market does. A single market does. And anyone saying, why are the EU doing this to us, is deliberately or perhaps accidentally failing to understand what the single market is. That's what you have when you have regulatory alignment. You know that every member state is abiding by the same rule book. We left because we wanted our own rule book, so we can't then turn around and say autonomously, we'll abide by yours after all.
And we put our own red tape in and made up our own rules saying that we will recognise the EU for when they release a medicine for the public, but they won't recognise us. But there's a little caveat saying that we recognise that it's good, but we need someone in the UK to sign off to say okay. Which has to be someone part of a Royal Society, chemistry, biology.
I completely understand.
And there's not that many of us to do it.
And that will cause log jams. That will cause backups as well. Even with stuff that's managed to get here, needs to be signed off on. I don't say this lightly, Dorian, but I think your explanation of this issue ranks in my top 5 Brexit infuriations of all time.
I've done about a couple of 100 pages worth of Brexit scenarios of what could have happened back in 2016-17. We looked to Northern Ireland and said, would that be a nice way through? And the conclusion was, we can't trust that something is going to come up tomorrow. They're going to change their mind.
Making life harder for the people most in need of help. That's incredible, actually incredible to hear it explained. Now, I don't know, I'm not making light of the plight of musicians or cheese exporters or wine exporters or wine importers. We've spoken to loads of people directly affected by this. But something about that story and the urgency conveyed by the 2 previous callers, the dad and the doctor, as I am calling them, because I love alliteration. That's really got me, actually. That's why we won't shut up about what a stupid thing you did in 2006. And of course you want me to be quiet about it. Of course you do. But we can't, can we? Not until you get things back to at least what they were before you did this stupid thing. And contempt for the con and compassion for the con. But if you're telling me to be quiet about it, I'm afraid you don't get filed under compassion for the con anymore. You tell those parents driving 3 hours for epilepsy medication for their children, or ADHD medication, or the patient with schizophrenia looking for antipsychotics. You tell them that you knew exactly what you were voting for. Let's get Bill back on the phone about how he doesn't mind being poorer. It was for the national good to leave the European Union. Actually, let's not. It's 11... no, it's not. Stop. It's 12:46.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:49. That was close, that one. Number 14, Mo, has gone through from the last round with... I'm going to put a couple of high-scoring losers through as well. So Aidan at 11 got quite a lot of votes. And going back to the second round, are going to put through Tim, who got 8. Adrian was the winner on 10, but we've got another on 8. And in the first round, I'm afraid Bob was far and away in front, so I don't need any high-scoring losers from the first round. It's not the Olympics. And now the final selection of the, what's it called again? Smear Keir, that's it. This is from Andy, who was actually the last entry as well. If I had been paying any attention to what the producer was doing, I wouldn't have allowed people to have multiple entries. Otherwise, we would literally be here forever. But here's Andy's second go at 16.
Smear Keir.
Yeah, good. I'm glad there was no comedy sound effect on the end of that. I was coming to expect them. That was 16 by Andy. This is Joe at 17.
Smear Keir.
I feel there should be more. Did it end there? I feel it's going to come back in a minute. Like this is a pause. No? That was Joe at 17. Now it's time for 18. This is Ronan at 18. That's actually quite frightening. That made me think of rodents. Did anyone else think of rodents during that one? Thank you, Ronan. Now, this is Tom, who is 19.
You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
I do that.
This is Smear Keir.
That's ridiculous. That's you might as well do a time check or introduce the headlines, mate. That's just me in a weird voice. That's literally what I say. How can that be That was Tom at 19. At 20, it's our first duo.
They tried to smear him.
That is a vicious smear, Mr. Speaker.
But it only made him stronger.
If you think you could take me on, then simply try it.
Smear Keir. Warning, terms and conditions apply. Viewer discretion advised.
That's extremely good, but it's not a sting, is it? Or a jing. It's a trailer. I didn't ask for a trailer, lads. That was Simon and Chris at number 20. I think we might use that anyway. Can we put that through on a sort of management's discretion type of scenario? We'll definitely use that again, but it can't win because it's not a jingle. Hopefully number 21, your final one. Remember, you just need to text 16, 17, 18, 19 or 21. Don't text 20. And seriously, don't text. It's not funny. Everyone text 20 now, don't you? So I say don't text 20, and you all think it's so hilarious. Everyone's going to text 20 now, and I'll ignore it, and you'll be letting everyone down. And this is Simon. Is it the Simon from the Simon and Chris? So he's dropped Chris already, has he? What's that? Artistic differences? Do we know? Well, I'm very sorry. I feel like Yoko Ono. This is Simon alone. Sans Chris at number 21.
Smear Keir.
Yeah, that's quite good as well, actually. So that was 21. So just take 16, 17, 18, 19 or 21 to me now. And then we'll have, with the strong high losers, we'll have at least 6. Burko getting a good old run out there, John Burko. He's back on telly, you know. He's in the Traitors in America, presented by Alan Cumming, who is, of course, a previous guest on Full Disclosure. We're going to reach a point soon where everybody famous that I like has appeared on Full Disclosure, and you will know that someone who hasn't appeared on Full Disclosure, it must just be because I don't like them. So I won't be able to keep my dislikes of famous people secret anymore, because you'll say, has he been on Full Disclosure? And I'll say no, and you'll go, oh, so you don't like them then? And I'll go, no comment. Some people say no, all right? Some people don't fancy it. Some people haven't got a clue who I am. Some people are appallingly advised. So there are other reasons why people don't. Some people are busy. Let's get back to the drugs question, which is desperately serious, but I think we all possibly recognise the need for some light alongside the shade. Scott's in Clydebank. Scott, over to you.
Hi, James. The lightheartedness was very welcome there, because I think the previous caller got me very frustrated.
Me too, man.
To say the least. Yeah, that's up. We have a number one Brexit reason.
I think you're right. So what's going on in your world?
So my youngest son, he's 4 years old, Oliver. He has cerebral palsy and some conditions that come with it. He has epilepsy, he has muscle tone, and a couple of different things. Yeah. I would say over the past 3 to 4 months, we've really struggled to get some of his key medications, to the point where, as the dad earlier on was saying, we phone around all the pharmacies, We go to them, we call the GP surgeries. Our pharmacists, our GPs, consultants are phenomenal at helping. We're at this stage now, we ordered his prescriptions 10 days ago.
Yeah.
And I've just managed to get one today. We're having to...
When would you have run out if you hadn't got hold of it?
So we kind of expected this to come. If our pharmacist is really good and kind of pre-warns us saying, look, stock is running low on these things. They phone us up even when we don't have a prescription to let us know. They're really, really supportive. So we are 2 weeks ahead of where we would need the medication because we can plan ahead.
Thank God for that, but it's still there, isn't it? Looming, coming towards
absolutely. You. Yeah. But we're at this stage now where the 3 key medications he needs are one for his seizures, one for his muscle tone. If he doesn't have the seizure one, he will have a seizure. The one for his muscle tone, if he doesn't have that, he'll be in extreme pain. He won't be able to sleep at night or anything. And the last one, which almost seems trivial, but is probably the most life-threatening of all, is Senacot to help him go to the toilet.
Really? Just a laxative?
Yeah. Yeah,
a herbal. It's a herbal laxative, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're struggling to get hold of that? Well, again, I suppose supply chains and manufacturing, there's no rhyme or reason to what will be affected and what won't, is there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because of his condition, he's fed through a tube, so everything has to be liquid.
Of course it does.
He's been in hospital 3 times in the past year with very serious urine infections, and they've been caused because he's been constipated and he's not been able to empty his bladder, and the infection, because he has a weakened immune system, takes hold very, very quickly. Within 2 or 3 days of the infection starting, if we don't get him cleared and on antibiotics, we will end up in hospital. And it's ridiculous how simple things like this weren't thought about and weren't planned for.
Well, you would. I hear you, but I don't know how much of this would be happening if, for example, you were in Germany or France, because they have got problems as well. And
absolutely.
I'm not offering that up as a challenge to you or a contradiction. I'm just offering it up as an admission of my own ignorance. But we can say with certainty that things are worse than they would be
definitely. I worked for a German IT company up until last year. I've got friends over there, and they talk about the same kind of issues. However, the issues are nowhere near as bad as they are here.
And what do you do? Talk about you a bit. Not you. How are you and Oliver's mum coping with this?
You just cope. You just have to do it. It's part of the job of being a parent, and you're a parent stroke carer for him. You need to adopt his roles. You need to be proactive. Sometimes you need to separate yourself from being the parent and being his carer, and be very practical and kind of logical and methodical about what you need to do from it, which can be difficult.
Yes.
I mean, just now we're having to pick up medications from the hospital. It's the only place we can get the 3 medications. So it's as if he's in a hospital ward. They send the prescription to the hospital.
Good Lord.
After everywhere else is tried, but we can't get the liquid forms.
And that makes everything. So you need the Senacot.
Yeah, so we need to get tablet forms, follow the instructions the chemist has given us, take them home and make the solution up ourselves and then give them that. Which it's a simple process, it's not complicated, but it's something else you're having to do on top of everything else that you're doing looking after someone with complex needs. And we've always known Oliver would have these needs. We knew before he was born what his condition was going to be and how much support he would need. It's a pleasure in our life. He brings more joy than anything else. But it's just more problems on top of problems.
You've already got a rucksack, and they're sticking bricks in it, aren't they? Really, that's the point.
Yeah, absolutely.
What a lovely thing to say, though, Scott. You know, this hour began with a brilliant dad, and it ends with a brilliant dad. And you'd both say to me, "I'm not a brilliant dad. I'm just doing what any dad would do." And you're probably right. You might be right, but I still wish you weren't going through it. I really do.
No, thank you. And it affects everyone. The whole family's affected.
Of course it is.
From it. Grandparents worry, and the concerns go everywhere. Even outside, the chemists worry, the doctors worry, the consultants worry. These are all concerns that, for my son being my son, all these other people have a vested interest in looking after him.
And that's why they went into the jobs that they went into. And I will.
If they've not got enough stress, here's more stress on top of it, and more stress, and more stress. And actually, we're not going to give you any more money, and we're going to make you work longer hours, and we'll throw more stress on again.
You covered a lot of ground. I'll cover the last bit, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but the Conservative government will today be dedicating most of its energy and time to arguing with itself about deporting asylum seekers to a country from which we now accept asylum seekers because it's not safe. That's what they'll be doing. And you wonder what that poll on the front page of the Telegraph was all about, don't you? It's just gone one. Apologies, I'm late. If you missed any of today's show, you know what to do. It's all there on Global Player, as are the world's biggest podcasts. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4 on LBC, but Sheila Fogarty is here now.
James O'Brien on LBC.